In the far west of Canada lies a body of water known as the Salish Sea. Straddling the Canadian province of British Columbia and the U.S. state of Washington, the Salish Sea includes an intricate network of connecting channels and adjoining waterways, connecting ports and cities such as Vancouver, Seattle, and Tacoma. At first glance, the Salish Sea is a picture of marine serenity, a haven for oceanic wildlife such as sea lions, humpback whales, and orcas. But looks can be deceiving, and scratching the surface reveals a horrifying series of occurrences that stretch back more than 100 years and have some truly disturbing implications. In 1887, residents of the newly incorporated city of Vancouver made a rather chilling discovery. They discovered a boot washed up on a stretch of shoreline, and since leather was still an expensive and heavily coveted commodity at the time, they attempted to retrieve it in hopes of recycling the material. However, upon picking up the boot, the scavengers recoiled in horror when they found that it still contained the remnants of a human leg. News of the incident became entrenched in local folklore and led to the discovery site being named Leg in Boot Square. History repeated itself on July 30th of 1914, when natives from the village of Kimsquit talked of finding a human leg encased in a high boot near the mouth of the Salmon River. The Vancouver Sun reported that, to the best of their estimations, it had belonged to a man who had drowned on the river the previous summer. But how exactly it became detached from its owner remained a mystery. The grim phenomenon either went unreported or subsided completely for almost 100 years, until finally, in 2007, the discovery of dismembered feet made a sudden and rash re-emergence. On August 20th, 2007, an American visitor to the Jedediah Island Marine Provincial Park picked up a size 12 Adidas sneaker, one with a sock still embedded inside of it. It had been lying on a stretch of shoreline, and with curiosity having apparently gotten the better of them, they picked it up, thumbed open the sock, then screamed as they were greeted with the sight and stench of rotten flesh. Police were immediately called to the scene, with investigators determining that it was a man's right foot which had become disarticulated due to being submerged in the waters of the Salish Sea. DNA analysis showed the remains belonged to a missing person said to be suffering from a deep depression. Just 6 days later, a second disarticulated foot was discovered by a couple hiking on a nearby Gabriola Island. At first, it was suspected that it may have been the left foot of the depressed missing person, yet the fact that it was also a right foot, and the sneaker had been produced around the same time as the first, led investigators to speculate that there might have been some kind of serial killer at work, one whose modus operandi was to toss the severed right feet of their victims into the sea as a means of taunting the authorities and haunting those that found them. No additional detached feet were discovered until February of 2008, when a right foot and a size 11 Nike were recovered from Valdez Island. The remains were identified as belonging to a 21-year-old man who had been reported missing around 4 years earlier. But local law enforcement was quick to declare that his death was not considered suspicious and that he had died as a result of either misadventure or taking his own life. The man's right foot was later discovered on Westham Island by 2 hikers on June 16th. May 22nd, 2008 saw the first female foot being found on Kirkland Island. It was thought to have washed down the Fraser River after its owner jumped from the Pattullo Bridge in New Westminster in April 2004. Again, it was speculated that the cause of death was them taking their own life, but the woman in question had no history of depression or any other kind of mental health problems, and she had neglected to leave any kind of note prior to her disappearance. The woman's left foot was found floating in the Fraser River in November of the same year. A few months later, The right foot of a man was found covered in seaweed by a camper on a beach near the town of Piesch in Washington state. The shoe was confirmed to contain human bones and flesh by the Clallam County Sheriff's Department, who also determined that the foot had been carried south from Canadian waters. No more severed feet were found washed up on the banks of the Salish Sea for almost a whole year, and some have speculated that this is perhaps the best evidence of a serial killer that currently exists. The massive publicity that the finds generated may have spooked them, causing them to delay any murders or dumping of body parts for a considerable amount of time. It wasn't until October of 2009 that the next detached foot was found, this time in Richmond, British Columbia. The remains were determined to have belonged to a man from Vancouver who was reported missing in early 2008, but the circumstances surrounding his disappearance remained an eerie mystery. The find once again captured the imagination of the public on both sides of the international border, and arguably, this once again caused a potential serial killer to lay low for almost the exact same amount of time, just shy of a year. In August of 2010, a small woman or child's foot was found on the shores of Whidbey Island down in Washington. A detective from the Island County Sheriff's Office released a statement saying the foot would be tested for DNA. But following these tests, there was no match found in any national database that provided a clue to the person's identity. The next foot, discovered on December 5th of 2010, also belonged to a smaller woman or a child and was found on the tidal flats near Tacoma, Washington. The right foot was still inside a boys-style size 6 Ozark Trail hiking boot, and the fact that the feet of two separate children were found within just months of each other and in the same area once again fueled speculation of a serial killer. A pattern was clearly forming, one that repeated itself once again where there was a lack of human feet discovered for almost another year. It took until August 30th for another foot to show up, and this time it was discovered near False Creek up in British Columbia. The sneaker in question was a man's white and blue size 9 running shoe and was found floating next to the Plaza of Nations Marina. Unlike many of the other severed feet, this one was still attached to the lower leg bones and had been disarticulated naturally at the knee due to the water. Some argued this was evidence that the whole phenomenon was simply a tragic but natural occurrence, the consequence of the foolish and depressed getting into trouble near the shores of the Salish Sea. But as we all know, it's fairly common for serial killers to switch up their modus operandi in order to throw the cops off their scent. And with heavy speculation blossoming over the origins of the dismembered feet, it's possible that a potential killer might want to make things look as natural and non-suspicious as possible. The next foot was found on November 4th of 2011 on the shores of British Columbia's Sasamat Lake. A man's right foot was found inside a size 12 hiking boot in a pool of fresh water by a group of campers, and in January of 2012, it was identified as belonging to a local fisherman who went missing in 1987. Unbelievably, the Canadian police released a statement saying that the foot separated naturally from the body and do not suspect foul play, even though it wasn't clear exactly how the man had gone missing. Just over a month later, near Seattle's Lake Union, a human leg bone and foot were found wrapped in a black plastic bag under the Ship Canal Bridge, and by January the following year, the Seattle medical examiner had not identified the victim or determined their cause of death. At this point, it's almost like someone was trying to draw attention to the idea that these were no mere accidents. Whoever had tossed the foot into the Salish Sea had taken the time to remove the person's shoe or boot before wrapping it in a plastic bag, almost like they had dithered between not wanting to be caught, but then seeking the infamy of the public knowing there was a serial killer on the loose. After this, between January of 2012 and January of 2019, 8 more human feet, all belonging to different people, have washed up in various places on the shores of the Salish Sea. And while many still chalk the incidents up to a tragic accident and fatal misadventures, I'm very skeptical that such a bizarre and frightening phenomenon can be explained away so easily. If you ask Gail Anderson, a leading entomologist at British Columbia's Simon Fraser University, Body parts such as hands, feet, or even a human head can often detach as a result of water-submerged decomposition due to the relatively weak cartilage-based attachment to the greater torso. Such extremities rarely float, but then add a mostly rubber foam sneaker into the mix, or even decomposition-related gases, and you have something that could float for miles before ending up washed ashore somewhere. That still doesn't quite explain how these people's bodies got into the water, but it certainly might rule out the possibility of a serial killer cutting off their feet and tossing them into the sea as a way of frightening law enforcement and the media. However, ask certain members of law enforcement about the incidents, and we get a rather different answer. Both American and Canadian homicide detectives have spoken of how frighteningly unusual it is to find only the feet of the deceased parties, but no other body parts. Some have even mentioned that the odds of finding 2 dismembered feet from the same corpse and still not finding any other body parts washed up has to be around 1,000,000 to 1. Even one of the detectives assigned to one of the cases referred to it as nothing short of an anomaly. Even more suspicious is how close some of the feet have washed up in relation to one another, suggesting that some of them really had been tossed into the water at a very particular location, with set currents taking them in similar directions across the Salish Sea. The reason behind the Salish Sea's severed feet may well turn out to be some kind of bizarre but natural phenomenon. But between you and me, I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if they turned out to be the handiwork of some sadistic, foot-loving serial killer. Hey friends, thanks so much for watching. Just a quick heads up, I release new videos every second Monday at 7 p.m. EST. Also check out my main channel, Let's Read, where you can hear longer compilations of interesting stories just like these. And if you prefer audio only, feel free to check out the Let's Read podcast, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All linked in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you in the next one.